Hello, my name is Bryson Lester, and the country that I have chosen to present on for this project is Denmark. Denmark is a small country in Northern Europe, and much like other countries in Europe, Denmark's economy and workforce has seen substantial impact from labor unions. Many different fields of work in Denmark are represented by unions, from traditional trade jobs to office and clerical jobs. This presentation will cover a range of topics regarding the influence of labor unions on Denmark's workforce. The primary areas that I will cover here will be the historical development of labor unions in Denmark, current legislation governing labor unions, union density, meaning the number of unionized members in an industry, major labor unions and their policies in Denmark, the role of government, especially in union management relationship, and the impact of globalization on union management. To give a brief history of the country, Denmark is a small Nordic country in Northern Europe. As you can see on the map, Denmark is just north of Germany, west of Sweden, and south of Norway. It occupies the peninsula of Jutland, which extends north from central Western Europe. Along with Norway and Sweden, Denmark is part of the Northern European region known as Scandinavia. Denmark is also a Nordic country, along with Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden. These few countries are unique in that they are mostly disconnected from the rest of Europe. Before labor unions began in Denmark, there were groups known as Nordic guilds. These guilds function in a very similar way as our modern unions. These were groups of craftsmen or merchants in a specific trade who worked to protect their industry and set standards. After their dissolution in 1862, unions began to organize by the year 1870. Going back as far as 1899, collective agreements between unions and employers' federations has been the foundation of labor standards in Nordic countries. Unions and the Social Democratic Party were two crucial parts of the labor movement in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden until the last quarter of the 20th century. Many of the Danish craft trade unions were well organized during the 1880s. Nordic conferences made key decisions for the region, establishing labor councils and union federations. National union federations were set up in Denmark and Sweden in 1898. Unions also began to grow in unskilled labor after major strikes in Finland. The Nordic countries were very similar in their development of unions early on. However, they began to move in different directions at the beginning of the 20th century. For Denmark, they experienced what was called the Great Lockout in 1899. Union workers wanted to gain influence on regulation of pay and labor standards and had a unique method for striking in order to achieve their goals. And because of these strikes, the employers responded with lockouts. It began with a strike by carpenters, and employers responded by shutting down all trades in the building industry. 11 trades in all were locked out from performing their work. After 3 long months of negotiations, the parties agreed on a settlement on the 1st of September in 1899. In the settlement, collective bargaining was centralized, and a national system of dispute resolution was introduced. Nowadays, there are still many unions in Denmark, but most of their leadership is handled by the union federations. In 2019, a merger of the Danish Confederation of Trade Unions, known as LO, and the Confederations of Professionals in Denmark, known as FTF, occurred, creating the Danish Trade Union Confederation known as FH. FH represents many unions across Denmark, and hopes to contribute to a society that focuses on democracy and mutual gain. Even today, unions still hold an important place in Denmark's history as well as modern work environment. When it comes to labor's legislation, Denmark is unique in that there is really very little legislation regarding labor relations. The relationships between employers and unions is characterized by collective bargaining, to the point that the Danish government has tried to limit their involvement as much as possible. Part of the success of Denmark's labor relations is due to their famous labor market model, flexicurity. Flexicurity is a model that helps employers remain flexible to constantly changing economic environments while also providing protections for employees through a safety net. The model has three core elements. One, employers can hire and fire at will without excessive costs for dismissing employees. Litigation surrounding dismissals is uncommon in Denmark. Employees who join and pay subscription fees to an A-kasse, or an unemployment insurance fund, get up to 2 years benefits after losing their jobs. And number three, the Danish government runs education and retaining programs and provides counseling services to get unemployed people back to work as quickly as possible. The state also provides an allowance to people who have lost their livelihood due to illness, divorce, or unemployment. They also clarify who does and does not qualify for these benefits. This model has been so successful because of the long history of collaboration between employer associations and unions. Their success in negotiating agreements has allowed the state to remain relatively uninvolved. There is legislation discussing working hours and vacation days and other similar areas, but most every standard in Denmark has been a product of collective bargaining. Next topic is union density. First, what is union density? To put it simply, it is the percentage of workers who are union members. To give a little more detail to that, union density or trade union density is the ratio of wage and salary earners that are trade union members to the total number of wage and salary earners in the economy. It is accordingly a standard measure to compare the associational power of trade unions across countries. So, as stated, it is the ratio of trade union members to the workforce as a whole. To measure as a percentage the portion of a country's workforce that is protected by unions. Union density is also used to understand what industries have more union membership than others. Europe is different than many other parts of the world when it comes to union density, in that it is higher than other economies around the world. Because of this, Denmark has a relatively high union density ratio. In 2018, union density in Denmark was 67.3%. Two-thirds of the country is either a union member or a trade unionist. There are many different unions across multiple industries within Denmark, from craft unions that cover metal workers to unions that cover clerical workers as well. There are unions that represent engineers, lawyers, teachers, and doctors. Unlike the US, where unions are primarily for blue-collar trades, almost every industry in Denmark has some form of union representation. Union density in Denmark did, however, fall from 71.2% in 2012 to 67.3% in 2018. Not a significant drop, but it has followed a trend of falling participation across Europe and the US. It will be interesting to see what happens and if this changes in the future. As I mentioned before, trade unions are primarily represented by trade federations, and the primary trade federation is known as the Danish Trade Union Confederation, or FH, that I mentioned earlier. FH is made up of more than 80 unions, from small craft unions to teachers' unions. The four largest unions, which were previously part of the FDF Federation, which has now become FH, are known as 3F, HK, FOA, and Dansk Metal. 3F is the largest union at 226,000 members and represents general workers in Denmark. Next, HK at 179,000 members and represents shop and clerical workers. FOA with 153,000 members and represents public employees, and Dansk Metal for metal workers at 72,000 members. As discussed before, the government's involvement in labor legislation is very limited. So the primary method of defining fair wages, benefits, and working conditions is through collective bargaining or collective agreements between unions or union federations and employers or employer federations. What is a collective agreement? It is an agreement between two parties about the working conditions that are applicable to employees in a specific company or industry. The two parties discuss and come to an agreement on what they both consider to be fair conditions. These agreements cover most every aspect of work, one of these being working hours. In most industries, the standard working hours per week stated in these collective agreements is 37 hours. This standard started on only a few industries, but has spread through other industries through collective bargaining. Another policy is the salary conditions. In Denmark, there is no legal minimum wage, uh, no legal minimum wage laws, so these decisions are made by collective agreements as well. Minimum pay standards are set usually by the industry, whether that is an hourly rate based upon the work, a unit rate, or a salary for the more white-collar jobs. Collective agreements are used to set fair pay standards. Driving and rest time requirements are another agreed upon standard set by these collective agreements. Here's an interesting one that I found. Obligation to be available standard. This standard clarifies the employer's limits and the employee's obligation on what times they are to be available and what times are considered off the clock, and if the employer can contact the employee during those times. I thought this was a good practice and would love to see this become a more widely accepted standard across unions as well as across other countries as well. I think that'd be a very valuable standard to set. Other policies include union membership, which is entirely voluntary for employees to join; industrial action, which gives members the right to take action in order to reach agreements such as striking and other methods; freedom of association, which means employers are free and protected to join trade unions; employer rights, which gives the employee the right to manage and distribute work; and conflict resolution agreements, which is a framework used to resolve conflicts between parties. There are other policies specific to certain unions, but these that I have discussed are the ones that are pretty standard across all unions in Denmark. As I have previously mentioned a couple of times, the government of Denmark has tried to limit their involvement in regulating the labor environment, leaving this to unions and employers to work out through collective bargaining. Since this is the case, the Danish government strongly encourages collective bargaining and strong social partners. Union federations are the leading source for enforcing good working conditions, pay, and workplace safety standards. And the primary way that this is achieved is through collective bargaining, as I've mentioned a few times before already. If these associations began to fail and bargaining became unsuccessful, then the government would have to become more involved. So it makes sense that the government be supportive of these associations and their success at collective bargaining. One area of involvement that the government takes is through tripartite cooperation. Tripartite cooperation is a collaboration between employers, organizations, unions, and the state. These agreements can cover a range of labor market and employment policies. These agreements are not used frequently, but they are sometimes to achieve certain environment or agricultural goals. Most recently, it was used to come to an agreement with the agricultural industry to increase environmentally friendly practices in agriculture. Denmark became the first country in the world to tax livestock emissions. The tax will include a fee per ton of CO2e emissions on livestock. The agreement also hopes to promote better and more efficient use of land to cut carbon emissions and restore nature. It also serves to advance climate action to protect the environment while also producing high quality food and clean water. Through more sustainable land practices, the government hopes to restore life in the fjords and coastal ecosystems. By reducing nitrogen pollution, nitrogen pollution has a significant impact on Danish waters, which in turn impacts local wildlife and food quality. Through these tripartite agreements, the government hopes to get the employers and unions to agree that these things can be improved, and together they can make steps toward making that happen. Something important to consider in this process is that this is an agreement and not a law passed. The unions and employers have a say in the process, which I think is a better approach than simply passing legislation. When everyone can have an input on decision making, then the case can be made that it is more likely to be successful because you will have greater buy-in on everyone's part to achieve the goal. Again, these agreements are rare, but are sometimes used to improve conditions for everyone. Lastly, the impact on Denmark unions from increased globalization. Globalization and unions have a very interesting relationship, to say the least. There are significant benefits that can come from it and large downsides. Some of the benefits include economic growth through more efficient use of resources, decreased shipping costs, and avoiding unneeded taxes and tariffs. In short, globalization can increase efficiency of both time and resources. Increased efficiency through globalization then leads to lower prices for consumers. Reducing costs in the production process allows companies to charge lower prices for their products and remain profitable. Globalization also gives companies access to new technologies that can enhance their production. It can also increase living standards in foreign countries and create more possible customers who can purchase their products. These are just a few of the benefits that can come with the growth of globalization. However, with globalization come some very real concerns. Low-cost competition by decreased labor standards is a major problem both economically and ethically. Exploiting people for cheap labor and gaining an advantage over other companies by significant lower costs creates a problem for other organizations. It can also create volatile economic conditions for developing countries by disabling the economy and banking system, as well as undermine democratic systems in developing countries. Globalization has its upsides and its downsides. And these inevitably impact unions. For most unions, globalization is mostly disliked because of its effect on jobs and wages. In more recent years, unions are known to increase the costs of production or labor due to their bargaining nature. This makes union industries especially susceptible to being outsourced. So, how does this play into Denmark's union focused economy? How does Denmark respond to the growing influence of foreign markets? Unlike other countries, Denmark is overall supportive of globalization. According to Times Magazine, a recent poll found that 76% of respondents said that globalization was a good thing. Denmark has made moves toward protecting themselves from the negative impact of globalization, one of which is a very low corporate tax rate. Lower tax rates is an attractive benefit for organizations because it means more profits for the organization. Denmark has also made itself an attractive destination for workers through their flexicurity program that I have mentioned before. Additionally, they don't have many trade restrictions. Denmark also takes a unique position to keep their workforce skilled and difficult to replace. Employees are constantly trained with new skills to make them valuable in a global environment. Denmark has made a real effort to embrace the constantly changing global environment. They understand that in order to remain competitive on the global stage, they need to be an attractive destination for both employers and employees. So, to bring this to a close, Denmark, unlike many other countries, has embraced unions in ways that other countries have not. Unions are the primary source of employment standards for the country. As we have covered in this presentation, the government wants to remain uninvolved as possible in the relationship between employers and employees. The primary mechanism for setting employment standards is through collective bargaining. Every country is unique in their own way, and what works for one may not work for another. In many countries, unions have been avoided as some relic of the past that has very little benefit in today's global economy. However, Denmark is most definitely an exception to this idea. They have shown that if properly handled, they can still be a useful tool in a modern world. Should other countries try to copy this approach, to try to replicate their success? That's pretty hard to say. Regardless of what you think of unions, there's something that every country can learn from Denmark and their success. Thank you for listening. I hope that this was a beneficial um, presentation, and thank you for your time.